Senator Griff. Senator Ludlam.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Last one, is it? I'll be brisk. Thank you for joining again, Professor Kelso. I'm fairly sure you could probably guess what I'm going to ask you about. Thank you very much, firstly, for the response you provided from estimates last March 1. We were on the subject of myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, MECFS, and I asked about diagnostic criteria, and you've given us a little bit of detail there on how it works in theory, and I'm probably going to ask you a few more detailed questions about how it could work in practice. But we also, in the last session, went into a little bit of detail about TCR, targeted...
Calls for research.
Sorry?
Targeted call for research.
Targeted calls for research, where you take areas where there are evident gaps and you take feedback from various advocates in the general community about what most needs work. You'd put a bit of info to us about MECFS and Lyme-like illness. And I'm just wondering, so that was back in March, whether you can provide us with an update of how that assessment process is going, and particularly whether there's any good news.
Thank you, Senator, and we appreciate your continuing interest in this very difficult disease. So, as we discussed last time, the particular issue we faced with MECFS is the wide range of questions that need to be answered. The absence of a regulated diagnostic test yet being generally available, despite the fact that there's clearly some research progress, which is promising and exciting. The lack of a clear, simple set of diagnostic criteria, and the lack of clear treatment protocols. So the sorts of range of research questions that the patient group wish to have answered is very broad. Yeah. And the difficulty for us is how to define exactly which questions would be tractable with the type of budget which could be applied to such a targeted call for research.
Okay, that's useful. Before you go on, what kind of budget are we talking about?
A standard budget for a targeted call for research, of which we can run a couple each year, is $5 million to be spent over up to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. So
Okay.
3 to 5 million over 3 to 5 years.
Yep, got it. I took your answer from last time, which you've sketched very similar conditions. Is that it's precisely the reason that those things don't exist that this is such an important area. So how is it progressing?
So at this stage, there are a number of different approaches we're taking to try to define exactly what we can do that will be a really useful investment.
Okay.
And so that includes consulting with the Department of Health and others in the Commonwealth to determine what data are being collected and what policy needs there might be.
Great.
We have contacted the National Institutes of Health in the US, who are
fantastic.
Now spending a significant amount of money, a little bit more money than we're able to spend.
Including here in Australia, yeah?
Yep, and so we want to understand whether there's a way that we can collaborate with the NIH to ensure that the right work is done. And that could be a way that we could leverage their broader expertise and, of course, broader budget.
You are aware that they're invested in the NCNED laboratory at Griffith University. They're one of the funding partners.
I didn't know that the National Institutes of Health in the US were
I believe they are.
Okay, that's good news.
Yeah, Twitter will strike me down if I've got that wrong, but I believe they are a funding partner up there.
Good.
Yes, I think that's extremely good news.
And so we think that there may be a way that, subject to their interest in collaborating with the NHMRC, we may be able to do something more efficiently than we could on our own, because we're very aware of the broad scope of the issues and the difficulty we would have with our budget and even with the small research sector in Australia to address those questions. So we have a number of approaches that we're taking. We're also consulting the medical colleges to find nominees for people who could assist us in forming a special committee, an expert advisory committee.
Yeah, that's where that sounds very similar to where we were at back in March. Has that progressed at all?
It has progressed. It was more conceptual at the time we spoke in March. It's more actively happening now. And we're also consulting with the new ARMAC, Australian Health Ministers Advisory Council working committee we have to advise us on priorities for targeted calls for research.
Okay.
So we are making progress. We've also had a meeting with Emerge Australia to talk about some
Brilliant.
aspects of this issue.
Not to get too carried away here, but it sounds as though a decision has been made to proceed in this area, and that decision hadn't been made in March. Can you just confirm that for us, or otherwise? Because it sounds extremely promising.
We are serious about trying to identify what we could fund and would be effective. It's only a decision at the point where we actually say, now we're going to put out a call for research and this is going to be the scope. But at the moment, this is serious exploration.
That's fantastic. It does sound like it's moved on a fair bit. It's less conceptual than it was back in March.
Yes.
Okay, this is a different session to what I thought we were going to have. All right, carry on. Anything more?
Well, that was a good start.
It was, wasn't it? No, don't tell me I've jinxed it. This has been such a long time coming, so it's great. How far away are you from some kind of decision, and what is it that you're waiting on?
Well, I think the conversation with the National Institutes of Health is a very important one, so we hope to be able to have that soon. We've contacted them, but as far as I've heard, we don't have specific feedback yet. We have to, as I discussed last time, we have to stagger these targeted calls to manage within our budget.
Yep.
We have a couple that are already in train this year in Indigenous health and in dementia. We also have, as you've mentioned already and we discussed last time, the Lyme-like illness in Australia issue, which the Minister has asked us to fast-track.
That's
so we need to,
as a separate TCR, or
as a separate TCR. Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So we have to manage the ordering of these and manage the work of forming expert advisory committees and making some quite critical decisions based on expert advice about how to proceed.
Okay.
So it will take some time because we do have to stagger those, obviously alongside our business as usual.
Yeah, I understand. But we're talking months, not years, right?
We're talking months, not years.
Okay. You did mention the advisory panel just now. You were concerned when I asked you back in March about whether the researchers at the NCNED would have some kind of conflict of interest. I've got correspondence from them, and I'm presuming they've corresponded with you as well, clarifying that they don't see any conflict. Has that discussion with them progressed any further? And the reason I'm harping on about them a little bit is that they are literally the best in the world, at least at the diagnostic side of this thing, and it seems would be a shame to have them on the sidelines.
As we discussed last time, we'd want the best in the world to be able to apply for the funding, and we have a strict guideline that the group which designs the targeted call for research will not be people who would apply.
Who would apply, yep.
And I think that's a very important separation.
Yeah, I get that. I don't think I'm giving away trade secrets here. The NCNED is not intending, as far as I'm aware anyway, to apply for any of the funding that they would be designing the guidelines around. Have you had any, rather than me being some kind of awkward intermediary, have you had any discussions with them directly about their participation in the reference group?
I haven't personally. I'd need to seek the advice of our team whether there has been any such discussion. I'd be surprised if there had at this stage.
Yeah.
But if
That'd
there
be
has,
good.
we can let you know.
Okay. I think I hop up and down about these folks a little bit because they are doing exceptional work, and they are based right here in Australia, with some support, I think, from the Queensland state government. Do groups like Emerge find a way onto advisory panels like this, or are you looking for clinical experts rather than advocates, or patient groups? How does the advisory, what's the makeup of an advisory panel for something like this?
In a case like this, it would be important to have appropriate consumer representation on the committee, and we do that with very many committees.
Okay.
And so it will be appropriate in this case, without preempting a decision about where those consumers should come from. But it is important to have a patient and consumer perspective.
Okay, this has gone a whole heap faster than I thought it was going to, so I've just got a couple more to finish up, but that sounds great. I'm not going to press you on timelines. I understand that there's some matters that you just can't pin down yet, but the last thing I really wanted to ask you about was clinical definitions and what GPs are given to work with around the country. Whether updating guidelines and clinical definitions for GPs is going to have to wait until this targeted research project is underway, or whether there's something we could do, for example, adopt the Canadian consensus guidelines or guidelines used by other governments. Where does that, first of all, is that something that's even within your bailiwick?
Well, first of all, I think that until we work out what the targeted call for research, if there is to be one, what its scope would be, it's hard to answer the question of whether any possible guidelines should wait for that research to be done. What I do understand is that the existing guidelines internationally that have been developed have not been strongly evidence-based, and that to be guidelines promoted and badged by the NHMRC, they would have to follow certain international standards of quality of evidence. And so my understanding is that evidence base has not yet been developed.
Okay. You mentioned the National Institute of Health before, from the United States. We danced around this area last time, and that some of the research money that have been spent by the NHMRC in past years has been spent in New South Wales on research and treatments that encourage people to exercise, and that is incredibly damaging for people with this condition. The National Institute of Health's Director, Dr. Francis Collins, has said that any exertion just makes you worse, and that's why I guess I'm harping on about it, even though I'm not doing a particularly articulate job of it. The sooner that we can get solid, consistent information into the hands of GPs, the sooner people with this condition won't be prescribed harmful treatments. Does that need to wait for a targeted call for research, or is that something that could just happen much sooner on the basis of the evidence that already exists?
I don't think that's a question that I can answer. I don't have the detailed scientific expertise, and that sounds like a clinical question that would be beyond our remit.
Who can I put that to? That's probably an unfair question as well. Is there anybody else at the desk?
Chief Medical
I know it's late.
If you could. Notice, I think it's a very disputed area, Senator. I think there are still some Australian experts who, in this disease, who would dispute that assessment that you described, but I haven't looked at the evidence recently.
There aren't any patients who dispute it, though.
Yeah, I'm sure there are patients who dispute it too, but I'm very happy to take that on notice and review the evidence of Dr. Collins as the basis for that statement.
Thank you.
And get back to you.
I think the people that you're assembling for your reference group that we've been speaking of, hopefully will put this question to bed once and for all. But I'm going to be just keeping an eye out on your webpage for press releases, Professor. Thanks for your